PlayStation's other upcoming live service shooter Fairgames is in trouble and is already falling apart. But honestly, at this point, is anybody surprised? I'm Captain Peach, welcome back to the pit. And a Kotaku report that just released revealed that Haven Studios' upcoming multiplayer heist shooter Fairgames has just been delayed again, and the studio is having some major shakeups. Originally revealed in 2023, Fairgame's premise centered around class warfare with what was described as emergent sandbox gameplay with shades of Robin Hood meets Payday. Teams of gamers are encouraged to eat the rich as they compete against each other in intense heists. The developer in charge, Haven Studios, was founded all the way back in 2021 by Jade Raymond, an industry veteran that was instrumental in creating the Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs franchises at Ubisoft. But she later went on to become a vice president at Google, where she would be heading Google's Stadia Games and Entertainment.
That was a weird-ass story, man.
To create exclusive content for Google's super popular Stadia streaming service. After the colossal failure of Stadia, she went on to form her own studio and began work on their first product, Fairgames. Haven Studios was then purchased a year later by Sony to be added to their lineup of studios and games, all focused on live service. A little more on that later. But after working on Fairgames for a couple of years, Jade and her team at Haven were ready to show off a trailer and give players a first glimpse. As I mentioned, Fairgames was first revealed back in 2023 during a PlayStation showcase, and its debut was, let's be honest, forgettable. It wasn't a gameplay trailer, and it wasn't even a tech demo. It was a cinematic teaser whose sole purpose was just to show the idea of the game. The major problem is, though, cinematic-only trailers for multiplayer shooters just don't work anymore. Players don't want vibe, they want clarity. Gamers have had enough bait and switches over the years to not trust CGI trailers over actual game footage. What's the gameplay loop? What's the hook? Why is this game different than any other? And unfortunately, Fairgames answered just about none of these questions. All we know is it's a heist-centered live service multiplayer shooter. That's it. So other than that, all we have to go on is the feel and aesthetic provided in the trailer. And that aesthetic and feel screams generic. The game's art style has been called out repeatedly for looking like yet another game that follows in the footsteps of Fortnite's and Concord's more goofy aesthetics. A soft-edged realism mixed with bright, high-saturated neon colors and a visual tone that seems more focused on selling skins and battle pass items than creating atmosphere. And just as a side note, I've gotten so freaking burnt out on all of these quirky characters. Stop it. Right from the get-go, this game has been referred to repeatedly as Concord 2 or Concord 2.0, drawing a lot of comparisons to that other major live Sony service shooter. And now, after the disastrous reveal of Marathon, you could probably draw some comparisons to that as well. And therein lies the problem. Fairgames isn't really offering anything new, at least based on this initial trailer. I'll admit though, heisting is definitely less common, but also a little bit more niche. It's another team-based live service game that will be filled to the brim with battle passes, cosmetics, and the usual seasonal events and character classes. We've seen this game before. We've played this game before. And gamers are pretty done with the unimaginative style and trend chasing.
Well, how about next time you get a board that can handle the Neutron style? Later!
And yet another live service game vying for your precious time and energy. There's only so many games I can regularly play and keep up with. People are getting very tired of this exact same formula for shooters and multiplayer games that every studio and publisher is jumping on to make some quick bucks and cash in on trends that become obsolete by the time these games come out. And the recent backlash to Sony's other major live service games like Concord and Marathon just cement this fact. Although I'm pretty sure the only art stolen in Fairgames was during an in-game heist. And the reception to Fairgame's trailer continues that backlash with an overwhelming majority of viewers seriously disliking it. Gamers simply said no. So after the terrible reception, what has happened since that trailer release? Well, a few months ago in February, there were some reports that the game was going to be delayed from a planned fall 2025 release date to 2026. But now, just this past week, is where the critical news comes in. That delay has now been further confirmed after external testing revealed some major problems with the game that has caused a lot of internal issues with its development. So much so that the woman that founded Haven Studios, Jade Raymond, has left the project entirely, before releasing a single game in the studio she founded. Not exactly a good sign. The most likely scenario here is that they got the game to a strong enough state internally where they feel they can begin testing externally to refine the experience and tighten up the gameplay. But that testing went incredibly south, because if the game is anything like we've heard and seen from the cinematic trailer, again, it probably plays just like you'd expect it to with little innovation or anything that makes it truly stand apart from the competition. After that, I think one of two scenarios happened. Either one, Sony saw how this was going and realized there's no way this isn't going to be another Concord level flop. Another similar situation where they bought the studio while they were making their first game based on old trends and a currently unpopular gameplay and art style. So they decided to get rid of Jade and delay the game until next year to try and salvage it.
What are you doing?
Me? Just hanging around.
Or scenario 2, Jade saw which way the wind was blowing and didn't want to be associated with another major financial flop. so she left the studio early to salvage her reputation. Either way, it seriously doesn't bode well for the future of Fairgames. If the founder and head of a studio formed to create a new competitive game leaves or is removed mid-development, there's probably a lot of trouble brewing, and a game that is already failing before it even gets a full reveal. Now, other employees have been promoted to head the studio and continue production, but the direction the game is going in already seems to be headed towards a cliff, with the initial incredibly negative reception and the reported internal issues, and will need a major overhaul or will be outright cancelled. But Fairgames isn't just a rudderless delayed game that is already struggling hard. It's a symptom of a much larger issue, one that's been building for years. Sony's obsession with live service is actively damaging the PlayStation brand. Back in 2022, Sony announced it would be investing heavily in live service, planning to release at least 10 live service titles by 2026. This was a dramatic shift from the narrative-driven single-player games that had defined the PS4 era. Games like The Last of Us, God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, Bloodborne, and Spider-Man, all critically acclaimed, all beloved by players. Now, we're looking at delays, cancellations, and internal chaos. The Last of Us Factions multiplayer? Scrapped. The rumored Twisted Metal live service reboot? Gone. London Studios live service fantasy co-op game? Cancelled. And overall, way more failures than successes. I dive into all of this in more detail in a video giving an overview of Sony's massive live service gamble, which I'll link at the end. But one after another, these projects are collapsing under the weight of bloated budgets, chasing old trends, unrealistic expectations, and a simple lack of player interest. And in the meantime, the pipeline of traditional PlayStation titles has slowed down to a crawl. Where are the first-party single-player experiences? Where's the next Bloodborne, the next Uncharted, the next surprise indie partnership? They've all been scrapped and adjusted so Sony can chase trends that peaked 5 years ago. Games like Fortnite and Warzone set the bar for live service so high for engagement, revenue, and updates that new entries either need to be exceptional or wildly unique to stand a chance. And Fairgames, like so many others, seems to be neither. What's worse is that Sony doesn't even seem to be learning. These aren't isolated stumbles, they're part of a pattern. A belief that if they just keep trying, one of these live service titles will stick and become the next golden goose. But that's not how this works. Live service games aren't lottery tickets. They're massive, risky investments that only pay off when the right mix of gameplay, identity, and community comes together. You can't brute force that with marketing or budget, you have to earn it. And let's be honest, when a studio's head quits mid-development, that's not confidence inspiring. That's not a sign of a well-oiled machine headed towards release. It's a sign that something, maybe everything, is broken. You know, there was a time when the PlayStation brand of games really meant something. It meant prestige, it meant polish, it meant cinematic, high-quality storytelling and genre-defining gameplay. Now, it unfortunately seems like PlayStation only cares about making the next multiplayer hit. The rise of live service games was always going to cause tension in the industry. Not every publisher could or should compete. But Sony had a unique position. They didn't need to copy Fortnite. They had already won players over with their single-player experiences. The strategy wasn't broken, but instead of doubling down on what worked and testing out new properties here and there, they tried a hard pivot, and it's not working.
Someone ought to put you in a mental hospital.
Someone should put you in a box floating down the river, Grandma!
The truth is, most people don't want 10 live service games from Sony. They want one amazing game crafted with care, built to last, and worthy of the PlayStation legacy. And that's what makes the Fairgame situation so frustrating. It's not just the game's delay, the studio shakeup, or the terrible reception, it's that this is what Sony and the industry at large think players want. Another skin-filled PvP shooter with a CGI trailer, a copy and pasted gameplay system, from what we can tell, and very little unique identity. It's a game built to chase metrics, not memories, which never works in the long term. So yeah, Fairgame is already failing and falling apart. But not because of one bad trailer and one missed deadline, it's failing because it's part of a failing strategy. One that's hurting the PlayStation brand and the entire industry more than it's helping. And honestly, it's a shame because Haven Studios, led by an industry veteran, could have been something special, a fresh start, a chance to do something bold. But instead, it looks like they've been caught up in what everybody else is doing. Until Sony and the entire industry changes course, or at least starts listening to what players actually want, we're going to keep seeing projects like Fairgame struggle. And PlayStation is going to keep losing its edge. Because you can delay a game, you can rework its systems, you can pivot the marketing, but once you lose player trust, that's a lot harder to get back. But hey, that's marketing. If you like the video, smack the subscribe, and if you want to watch that breakdown of Sony's live service gamble that I mentioned earlier, or another video YouTube thinks you'll absolutely love, click on one of the videos on screen. And until next time, stay peachy.